He was just a broken soldier, tired of people and noise, who moved to a forgotten cabin to disappear quietly. But one stormy night, 5 German shepherds broke free from a nightmare and showed up at his door, bleeding, limping, trembling, and looking at him like they'd known him forever. He hadn't spoken to another soul in weeks. He didn't ask where they came from, but when one of them placed a scarred paw on his knee and whimpered, he knew he wasn't the one doing the rescuing. What happened next will make you cry and believe in second chances again. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. The storm howled across the Montana wilderness like a wounded beast, dragging sheets of snow through the frozen pines. For a breathless moment, the world stood still, blanketed under a thick white veil. The mountains groaned under the wind's weight. A single light flickered from an old wooden cabin halfway up Ridgewood Bluff, where time had long ago stopped knocking. Inside, the fireplace hissed softly, licking at the logs like an old dog curling beside familiar feet. Jack Turner sat in his worn flannel armchair, hunched slightly forward, elbows on his knees, a tin mug of black coffee cooling in his hands. Jack was 62. A former soldier, tall, broad in the shoulders but lean like a tree that had withstood too many winters. His face was lined with memory, sun-darkened and creased around the mouth, but it wasn't the kind of wear that made a man seem tired. It made him look steady, unmoving. His hair, once thick and dark, now silvered and cropped close. A thick gray beard covered his jaw, trimmed but unbothered. He had been here for nearly 5 years, ever since his wife, Caroline, passed, quietly, without drama, just a candle that burned out during his last tour. They never had children. He hadn't told anyone where he went afterward. The cabin had belonged to his uncle, long gone. Jack had fixed it up with calloused hands and silence, the kind of silence that doesn't beg for company. He was stirring the ashes in the fireplace with a poker when it happened. Tap, 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 then a slow scratch, almost gentle. Jack turned his head, eyes narrowing. Another tap, a sound lost between wind and wood. He stood, stepped toward the door and pressed his hand to the rough cedar plank. Outside, snow whirled in a ghostly blur. The porch light above the door barely held back the storm. Jack opened the door a crack, and there they were. 5 figures huddled together in the blizzard. Not people. Dogs, German shepherds, covered in ice, fur clumped with mud and dried blood, paws cracked from the cold. Yet none barked. They didn't growl. They looked at him. Rex stood at the front, easily the largest, with a deep chest and a scar cutting across his left brow. His coat was darker than the other's sable with the streaks of iron gray. His ears were tattered, and he held his posture like a sentinel awaiting orders. His eyes were old, but not dull-filled with some unspoken code, as if he'd been a soldier too. Bella, just behind him, limped visibly. Her back leg dragged slightly, blood freezing near her paw. She was smaller, gentler, with golden fur matted at the neck. Her eyes flicked between Jack and the open door, uncertain. Max was younger, ears perfectly erect, tail low, but not tucked. His sable coat shimmered with frost. He was alert, eyes scanning the cabin's shadow like a scout checking for threats. Duke was lanky and underfed, ribs visible beneath his wet fur. He moved with stubborn pride, a slight defiance in his jaw as if daring the storm to take him. His eyes were sharp and fast. And finally, Luna, the smallest, her coat a light silver gray, trembling not from the cold alone. She had a wound on her shoulder, likely from wire, and she huddled into the snow, almost not moving. But her gaze was fixed on Jack. She didn't blink. Jack didn't ask questions. He stepped back, opened the door wide, let the heat bleed out as he whispered, "Come in." Rex moved first, slow and deliberate. The others followed, one by one. Bella staggered, but Duke turned and nudged her gently. Jack stepped forward and lifted her hindquarters with surprising tenderness, guiding her in. They moved as a unit, not just strays, something else. Inside, Jack motioned toward the hearth. He grabbed old quilts from the bench, spread them near the fire, and filled an old basin with water. The dogs huddled close, breathing heavy, steam rising off their backs like ghosts leaving the past. Jack knelt beside Rex. The dog didn't flinch. Their eyes met. "You've seen hell too, haven't you?" Jack muttered, placing a hand on Rex's neck. The shepherd closed his eyes for a breath, pressing his weight into Jack's palm. He got up, moved to the kitchen, and grabbed what canned meat he had meant for himself. He opened 5 tins. As he worked, something in his chest stirred. A memory he'd locked in the cellar of his soul. The sound of boots in mud, of breathing beside you in battle, of knowing someone had your back. Now it was paws, not boots, but the weight felt familiar. Far below the cabin, in the heart of Snowpine, an old woman stirred her soup. Eleanor Marsh, 71, had lived in the town since she was born. She was tall for her age, with silver hair pulled into a low bun and skin browned gently by years of morning walks to church and market. She was a widow, too, quiet, thoughtful, with a soft spot for lost things. She stood in her small kitchen stirring a pot of bone broth when her hand paused. Her eyes lifted to the snowy ridge outside her frosted window. She didn't know why, but something told her someone up there needed warmth tonight. She ladled the soup into a ceramic pot, covered it, and set it by the door. She would take it tomorrow morning, as she often did, to leave at the trail's foot, where the mountain met the road. A silent offering, because sometimes kindness doesn't need a reason. It just knows where to go. The morning in the mountains came not with warmth, but with silence. Snow blanketed the trees like a secret, muting every sound beneath its frozen hush. As the sky lightened from ink to pewter, the storm's rage had passed, but something else remained. Jack Turner, the former soldier who had chosen solitude in a weathered log cabin halfway up Granite Ridge, stepped outside into the brittle light. The air stung like broken glass. His boots sank into the fresh snow as he moved slowly toward the front of the cabin. Then he saw them. Not the paw prints that he expected, but the others. Parallel to the dog's tracks were deeper, heavier imprints, wide tire marks crushed into the frost, looping like a predator's circle. Footprints, too. A man's boot, military grade. Pacing. He crouched and ran his calloused hand across one of the depressions in the snow. "Someone was here," he muttered, more to the trees than to himself. Inside, the cabin was alive with small movements and heavy breaths. The fire had died down to an orange murmur, but Max lay alert near the door, his ears perked, his body a taut line of watchfulness. He had not slept. Jack knelt by Bella, who whimpered softly as he cleaned the blood from her paw. She was a medium-sized German shepherd, her sable coat tangled and dulled, and her left hind leg bore a raw cut that looked older than last night. Her eyes, soft and honey brown, followed his hand with a guarded trust. When he whispered, "You're okay now," she bent her head and licked his wrist once. Luna, the youngest and smallest of the 5, had curled near the fire. Her fur was paler than the others, and her body shook intermittently as if memories, not the cold, haunted her. She didn't yet approach Jack, but she no longer flinched when he moved. That was enough for now. Rex, oldest and largest, sat like a statue by the window, watching the woods. His ears were scarred, one eye slightly cloudy, but the dignity in his frame was unmistakable. A dog like him had led squads. Jack knew it before the tags confirmed it. Duke, all bones and battle wounds, was dragging small logs toward the hearth, clumsily but with purpose. The dog's teeth were worn, his jaw crooked from some past break, but he moved with a determination Jack recognized. "You were somebody's tool," Jack whispered. "But now you'll be something else." Max, the sentinel, growled low. Jack straightened. Someone was watching. Not from the woods, from the ridge. Jack turned just in time to catch a glimpse of movement, half a silhouette, the kind you see out of the corner of your eye. But when he stepped outside again, rifle slung across his back, there was nothing. Just the endless silence of snow-covered trees. Back inside, he fed them what little he had. Jerky oats soaked in warm broth. The dogs ate in turns, not one stealing from the other. Disciplined. trained, abused. He stared at their necks again. Where collars used to be, thick scars now ringed their fur like shadows of captivity. He touched Rex's with gentle fingers. It had been metal, tight, maybe electric, but it was gone now. He moved to the sink to wash out the bloody cloth. The water ran brown, then red, then clear. Outside, down the slope, Tim Parker had been watching since before dawn. The boy, 12 years old and always a little too thin for his height, hid behind a pine stump half covered in frost. He wore a hand-me-down coat 2 sizes too large, sleeves flopping past his wrists. His breath fogged in front of him as he squinted toward the cabin. He'd always thought Mr. Turner was strange, a loner, the man who never came to town except for monthly supplies, who didn't speak in church or wave at the gas station. But now there were dogs. 5 of them, all big, all beautiful in their own ruined way. They moved like soldiers. And Jack? Jack didn't look lonely. He looked surrounded. Tim pressed his back against the tree and thought of his video games, the ones where you built armies and won missions. And for the first time, he didn't want to play. He just wanted to see what happened next. The snow creaked under a sudden shift. Jack had stepped onto the porch, eyes scanning. He saw the edge of Tim's sleeve behind the tree. Their eyes met. Tim froze. Jack didn't speak, didn't shout. He simply nodded once, then turned back into the cabin. Inside, he picked up a pencil and paper. His handwriting was jagged but clear. To whom it may concern. These dogs are under my care. They are not stray. Do not approach without warning. He folded the note, walked out, and tacked it to the fence post. Beneath it, he drove a shovel into the snow, upright, deliberate. A marker. Back in town, Eleanor Maddox sat by her radio, twisting the dial with trembling fingers. She wasn't listening for news, she was listening for a sound. Anything that would tell her the world outside was still turning. She hadn't spoken to Jack Turner in over 2 years, but she'd seen the shadows in his eyes that day at the store. She had lost a son to war, too. That kind of silence, she knew, never healed on its own. She picked up the notebook beside her phone and scribbled something on the list. Canned meats, bandages, batteries. She didn't know if Jack would ever ask. But if he did, she'd be ready. She always had a little extra, because sometimes the world gives you no warning, and sometimes, without asking, you just prepare to be kind. Jack drove into town just after sunrise, the road still damp from the melted snow, his knuckles pale against the steering wheel. Pinebrook was waking up slowly, shops flickering to life, the postmaster unlocking the front gate, and the old diner leaking the scent of burnt bacon into the air. But Jack wasn't here for breakfast. Not today. The restless barking of Luna, the strange tracks, and the figure he was sure he saw through the cabin's window the night before, it all left him with a feeling he couldn't shake. Something, or someone, was circling. The sheriff's office stood quiet, its chipped wooden sign rocking lightly in the wind. Jack stepped inside, where the air was thick with old coffee and the faint trace of cigar smoke. Sheriff Henry Reed looked up from behind his desk, a man built more like a retired butcher than an officer of the law. His belly pressed against the desk's edge, and his thinning gray hair clung to a scalp that had long surrendered to time. He greeted Jack with a worn-out smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Jack explained everything. The strange howls, the boot prints too organized to be random, and the lingering feeling of being watched. The sheriff nodded slowly and offered a practiced chuckle. "Could be wolves," he said. "They get bolder in the cold." But Jack noticed the way his eyes slid to the side, the way his fingers drummed faster against the desk. There was something he wasn't saying, something deliberate in that pause. Just as Jack turned to leave, a voice behind him asked gently, "Coffee?" He turned to see a young woman with a sharp, intelligent gaze and a long red braid tucked beneath her deputy's cap. Mara Collins. The name tag on her tactical vest confirmed it. She couldn't have been older than 28, yet her stance was steady, her face carved with quiet seriousness. She wasn't smiling, but there was something in her nod, a silent acknowledgement, a wordless alliance. Jack felt it as clearly as if she'd whispered it aloud. "I believe you, and I'm watching too." Later, on the drive back to his cabin, Jack chose a different path, a side road near the ridgeline he rarely used. That's when the wind shifted. A sour, smoky scent rode the air, threading through the pines, not the dry smoke of a fireplace. Something wetter, burnt. He followed it until he spotted it. A small wooden shack, tucked deep in the undergrowth, half collapsed and still smoldering. Its roof had given way, revealing blackened beams and ash-covered ground. Jack stepped out of the truck, heart hammering. Inside there were chains, melted at the ends, and claw marks on the floor, deep and erratic. No signs of life, only the eerie silence of something destroyed, or silenced. He returned home in a haze. Even before he opened the truck door, he heard Luna barking from inside the cabin. Urgent, not afraid, alert. Jack rushed in to find chaos, not of fear, but of defense. Smoke had begun to thread under the cabin's back door. Bella had already grabbed Duke by the scruff and pulled him away from the haze. Max stood at the central hallway, blocking the ventilation shaft where the smoke tried to creep in. Rex was at the front door, muscles tense, eyes locked on the tree line outside. No command was given, but they had coordinated like soldiers. Like dogs that had known fire and danger, not once but many times before. They weren't just strays. These were trained, discarded, hunted. Jack's breath caught. They hadn't come to his cabin by accident. They'd escaped something, and now that something was coming for them. That evening, seeking answers, Jack stopped by McQuaid's, a rustic tavern where Pinebrook's truths often floated looser in the air, loosened by whiskey and bad lighting. He wasn't there long before he saw it. In a corner booth, a man in a wide-brimmed hat leaned forward, accepting a thick envelope from Sheriff Henry. The man's features were sharp, his skin oddly pale against the shadows of the booth. Clean-shaven, too clean. His gloves pristine black leather. No drink on the table, no crumbs, just silence and an unreadable grin. Cole Maddox. Whispers around town said he ran some kind of training camp in the deeper woods. Unlicensed, unlisted. The kind of place where dogs didn't come out the same, if they came out at all. The moment Cole's eyes met Jack's, something shifted. He smiled, but not like a man amused. More like a wolf baring its teeth behind velvet curtains. And just like that, Jack knew. The fire hadn't been a coincidence. It had been a warning. Jack spent the morning repairing the door with more care than strength. His fingers, though aged and rough from years of work, moved with the precision of someone who had once built things meant to last. Bridges, barricades, bonds. The cold had set in deeper today, turning the earth stiff and the air brittle, but he kept working. He dug trenches around the cabin's perimeter, not to drain rain, but to shape the land into a listening post. Along the tree line, he tied lengths of wire through old tin cans, each positioned to rattle at the gentlest of brushes. It wasn't elegant, but it was the kind of defense a man builds when he knows something's watching. Something that remembers. The cabin was no longer just a shelter. It had become a forward post, not of war, but of defiance, of memory, and maybe, if he allowed it, of redemption. Inside, Jack lined the walls with canvas and salvaged wood panels, cutting a narrow space in the center for training. The dogs watched him work with attentive eyes. They were no longer scattered. They moved like a unit, like soldiers learning a forgotten language. Rex, the eldest, sat upright by the front door, one ear cocked and the other folded from an old scar. His sable coat shimmered with streaks of silver under the light. Jack raised 2 fingers, then curled them into a fist. Rex didn't hesitate. He darted to the side window, nose low, ears high, eyes scanning, then returned. Jack's throat tightened. That had taken weeks with military pups. Rex had learned it in 2 days. Bella was slower. Her limp, likely from an old fracture, made her cautious, but her eyes burned with alertness. When Jack called her name in a sharp whisper, her head snapped to attention. She would hobble quickly to the source, never breaking gaze. It wasn't about speed. It was about trust. And she was giving it. Max was the shadow, a younger shepherd, maybe 5 years old, with a black saddle coat and a broader frame. He moved silently, slipping between doorways like a sentry. When Jack taught him to flank at a signal, 2 taps on the floorboard, Max obeyed without sound. He was never more than 6 feet from Jack, always watching. Duke had the spirit of a brawler, the youngest and stockiest of the group, with a wide chest and stubborn tail. Jack used old doors to build a simple practice barricade. Duke's mission? Break through on command. It took a few tries. Then the rhythm clicked. Jack knocked twice, stepped back, and Duke slammed his shoulder into the wooden frame until it popped open. Not reckless, but determined. Trained. And then there was Luna. She remained the quietest. Her movements were timid, eyes often scanning for exits, but something had shifted since the fire. Her body no longer curled against walls. She now stood beside Rex, watching the training sessions with something new in her gaze. Longing. Fear had not left her, but it was being outpaced, slowly, tenderly, by courage. One evening, Jack opened the door to find Luna standing outside in the frost-bitten yard. Alone. No one had called her. No one had coaxed. She had simply stepped out, nose raised to the wind, tail twitching slightly. She didn't stay long, only a minute, before returning inside, brushing past Jack's leg with a soft huff. But it was enough. Progress was not measured in miles, but in moments. Later that night, as the fire cracked gently in the hearth, Jack prepared rations for the next morning's drills. The cabin's silence was warm, filled with the slow breath of dogs in sleep. He didn't notice the package until the second time he passed the door. It sat quietly on the front step, a small canvas bag, fraying at the corners, with a string tied in a rushed knot. He opened it gently. Inside were 2 wrapped packs of hardtack biscuits, a flashlight with fresh batteries, and a note with no name. Just one line, scribbled in pencil, for when the nights feel longer than they should. Jack looked out into the trees but saw nothing. No movement, only stillness and frost. The next morning, as snow began to dust the clearing, Jack opened the cabin door to let the air in. Luna was already up, tail swaying gently. In her mouth she held the bag from the night before, now slightly damp from her breath. She placed it down with care near Jack's boots and looked up, not expectantly, but almost proudly. A gesture returned, a message understood. She had accepted the gift, and she wanted him to know. The forest had its own breath at night. It inhaled with the wind and exhaled in the rustle of leaves. But that night, something was wrong with the rhythm. The silence didn't stretch gently. It snapped. Jack sat up on the creaky cot, one hand instinctively reaching for the flashlight, the other for the whistle strung around his neck. Rex was already on his feet, ears pricked, a low growl trembling in his throat. Then it came. The sharp clatter of tin cans smashing against one another outside. The alarm. He moved quickly, hand signaling in the dim light. "Rex, hold position!" The old shepherd shifted to the front door, body low, muscles tense. Outside, under the fractured glow of moonlight, shadows slid between trees, thin, fast-moving, at least 3. No deer moved like that. From the back room, Max padded out, a dark blur against the pale wooden floor. Jack tapped his thigh, then pointed sharply to the left window. Max obeyed, disappearing into the night like a phantom. Duke was the last to rise, stretching only slightly before stepping toward the makeshift barricade Jack had trained him to break. Not yet. Jack raised a finger. Outside, a shrill whistle echoed, then voices. "You sure this is the place?" "Yeah. Keep your eyes sharp. Big guy said they'd be here." The voice was low, cocky, unmistakable. Maddox. Jack's shoulders tightened. He had known Maddox in another life. Younger then, before the scars, before the greed. The man had a charm like rusted silver, looked good until you felt the cut. 3 other figures followed behind him, weaving through the brush with an ease that spoke of practice. In their hands, leashes, chains, and metal poles. Animal control equipment, though none wore uniforms. They weren't here to help. From the tree line, Max let out a single sharp bark, the signal. Jack kicked the door open. "Duke, now!" The cabin exploded into motion. Duke charged first, a mass of muscle and fury slamming into the intruders like a battering ram. Chains clattered as one man tumbled backward, gasping. Rex lunged next, teeth bared, hurting Maddox back with a snarl that made the forest hold its breath. Bella, despite her injured leg, threw herself in front of Luna, who had frozen in terror near the porch. A gloved hand had nearly caught her collar. Bella snapped at it and barked furiously, blocking the way with her small but firm frame. Jack raised his rifle, fired once into the air. The bullet cracked through the silence like a warning from God. Maddox jerked backward. "He's armed!" That's when the forest lit up, blue and red lights blinking between branches, accompanied by the familiar screech of a siren slicing through pine. Sheriff Mara. Her SUV burst through the edge of the trees, headlights flaring across the scene. The thugs scattered like leaves in a storm. One dropped a metal card as he fled. It landed face down in a patch of mud, glinting faintly. Jack picked it up with a gloved hand. It was a keycard. No logo, no name, just dried mud across the magnetic strip. He didn't speak, only stared into the woods, jaw clenched. Inside the cabin, Luna shivered as Bella gently nuzzled her. Rex returned to Jack's side, panting hard but unharmed. Duke lingered at the edge of the porch, growling low. A few minutes later, Mara approached, her presence steady. She was in her late 40s, tall and athletic, with short salt and pepper hair tucked beneath her patrol cap. Her eyes, sharp and dark, scanned the scene before meeting Jack's. "Need backup?" she asked, breath visible in the cold air. Jack shook his head once. They were after the dogs. Her expression tightened. "We'll talk, but first, make sure they're all right." He nodded. Meanwhile, at the edge of town, a modest one-story house sat quietly under a blanket of fog. Inside, Eleanor sat by a dwindling fire, wearing a shawl that had seen too many winters. Her hands, spotted with age and softened by years of tending wounds and gardens, cradled a wooden ladle. She stirred a pot of barley and bone broth slowly. 5 wooden bowls sat neatly on the table, none labeled, but each in place, as though awaiting familiar souls. Though the windows were shut, a sound carried through, distant, sharp, a gunshot. She didn't flinch. Instead, she closed her eyes gently, hands resting on the edge of the table. "Lord, watch over the children," she whispered, "and their keeper, especially the one with the scarred eyes." She didn't sleep that night, just watched the flame until dawn arrived. The wheels of Mara's SUV crunched over gravel as they turned onto the overgrown road that once led to Briar Hollow Quarry. The headlights pierced the dark, sweeping across rusted signs, cracked concrete, and a gaping black maw that used to be the heart of local industry. Now it was nothing more than a forgotten scar on the land. Jack rode shotgun, his hand resting on Rex's back. The old shepherd sat upright, ears alert despite the hour. In the back seat, Max leaned forward, his nose pressed to the window, while Bella lay curled up beside Luna, who had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. The little pup's ribs still showed faintly through her fur, and Jack had wrapped her in a worn canvas jacket to keep the chill from her bones. Behind them, another patrol truck followed. Tim drove it, his hands steady on the wheel, posture more upright than usual. At 17, Tim was Eleanor's grandson. Tall and wiry, with shaggy blonde hair and deep-set green eyes, he had grown up in Pine Hollow's quieter shadows. But tonight, something had shifted. The way he held the flashlight, the way he scanned the tree line. The boy was learning what it meant to stand for something. When they reached the quarry's lower edge, Mara cut the engine. The sudden silence was unsettling, thick, as if the land itself was holding its breath. "Everyone out," Mara ordered quietly. The air was colder here, bitter. It carried the smell of rust, wet stone, and something else, oil, faint but fresh. Max was the first to pick it up. He moved forward with purpose, tail low, head sweeping side to side. Rex stayed close to Jack, while Bella, still limping from the skirmish the night before, kept near Luna, who blinked groggily at the shadows. Jack handed Tim a second flashlight. "Stay close. No sudden moves." Tim nodded once, gripping the light tight. The quarry grounds were littered with remnants of old operations. Broken pallets, cracked crates, rusted chain links tangled with weeds. Max sniffed one of the crates, then let out a short, clipped bark. Jack approached, sweeping the beam of his flashlight across the crate's side. A splash of oil. Fresh. Beside it, tire tracks, half erased but visible under the right light curved toward the main shed. Mara's jaw tightened. They moved as a group now, Jack at the front, Mara on his left, Tim bringing up the rear. The dogs flanked them, every step calculated. Then Max stopped. A muffled sound. Soft, barely there. Jack froze. Max turned toward a stack of pallets, his ears twitching. Bella joined him, nose low. She let out a soft whine and began to dig gently at the edge of a wooden crate that sat oddly crooked. Jack knelt beside her and pulled the lid. Inside, a hollow, and tucked in the far corner, 2 tiny pups. They were whimpering, barely moving. One had a gash on its paw, the other was shaking uncontrollably. Their fur was matted and their eyes blinked weakly at the sudden light. Jack reached in carefully. "They're alive," he whispered. But it was Luna who moved first. The smallest of them all, still thin and trembling, climbed down from Bella's side and squeezed through the narrow gap between crates. She crawled into the box and curled around the pups, her body warming theirs as her little tail wrapped protectively across their backs. The others stepped back, as if instinctively understanding this wasn't theirs to fix. Luna's breathing slowed, steady. The pups nestled in. Jack swallowed hard. He raised his phone and began to record, slowly panning across the crate, then the surrounding shed. In the corner, cages stacked in threes, some open, some still stained. Along the back wall, logbooks, crumpled receipts, discarded syringes. And, beside the door, a dented pickup truck. Its license plate, half buried in dust, read 69 HRW. Sheriff Henry's truck. Mara exhaled. "That's it. That's everything we need." Jack gave a small nod, then turned toward Rex. The old dog was standing by the truck, unmoving, his eyes focused on something behind the crates. Jack walked over. Tucked beneath the vehicle was a leather satchel, worn, faded. Inside, a small tablet, still powered on. Jack tapped the screen. A digital ledger. Dates, codes, initials. All time-stamped within the last month. He looked at Mara. "This isn't just about lost dogs," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's a trafficking ring." She took out her radio. "Requesting immediate evidence team and animal control units at Briar Quarry. We have live rescues, and we're sitting on a crime scene." Tim stood by quietly, staring at the pups with wide eyes. Do they get to come home with us?" he asked softly. Jack looked down at Luna, who had not moved. Her eyes were half closed, her body gently rising and falling with the pups' shallow breaths. He nodded. "For tonight, yes." Tim smiled, a small, hopeful thing, and stepped forward to help carry one of the crates. As the officers began to move around them, setting markers and snapping photos, Jack crouched beside Rex. The shepherd was quiet, his gaze distant, as if watching something far beyond the quarry walls. Jack rested a hand on his head. "We'll go home soon," he murmured. "First wins ours, old boy." Rex leaned forward and licked Jack's hand once, a slow, deliberate gesture. Not of excitement, but of understanding. A promise kept. The horizon cracked open like a promise. Faint tendrils of orange stretched over the jagged silhouette of Briar Hollow Quarry, where frost clung stubbornly to rusted fences and silence hung heavy in the frigid dawn. Then the stillness broke. Red and blue lights spun across the gray stone as state police vehicles surged through the gate. The ground trembled beneath the weight of armored tires. Boots hit gravel. Voices shouted commands with the precision of a long-planned operation finally set in motion. From the ridge above, Jack stood with Rex at his side, Mara just behind him, watching it all unfold. The old shepherd stayed close, not tense, but steady, as if he sensed this was what they'd been working toward. The chill nipped at Jack's knuckles as he adjusted the collar of his coat. He didn't speak. He just waited. Then came the shout, "Suspect on the move!" Maddox. The wiry man burst from the side of the quarry shed, arms flailing, panic wild in his eyes. His once slick black hair was now matted with sweat and dust, and his thin frame looked even more gaunt beneath a ripped fleece jacket. He ran, boots slipping on the frozen ground, past the broken crates and tire ruts. But he didn't get far. Max darted from behind a loader, lean and sharp like a shadow come to life. At the same time, Duke, the hefty brown mutt once too timid to bark, lunged from the opposite flank, his growl low and guttural. The two dogs moved like they'd trained for this moment together. Maddox froze, eyes darting, arms raised instinctively. Then Rex appeared behind Jack, calmly descending the slope. He didn't bark. He didn't need to. Maddox fell to his knees. "Don't bite me! Don't—" Officers closed in, slapping cuffs on him before the dogs ever had to touch him. Jack gave a soft whistle and Max trotted back, tongue lolling, his eyes bright with adrenaline. Duke lingered longer, tail stiff, before finally backing off at Rex's silent nod. Near the main building, the doors were pried open. One by one, cages were dragged into the open, each revealing frightened but living creatures. German shepherds, beagles, mutts of every shape, some trembling, some barking defiantly. Many had scars, many were too thin, but they were alive. Bella stood near the edge, her injured paw lightly bandaged from the night before. She pressed her head against Luna, who was still curled protectively around the two pups they'd found. A quiet warmth passed between them, a kind of ancestral knowing, a dog's prayer without words. As the rescue teams moved through the quarry, the barking of dozens of dogs rose like a wild chorus. It echoed through the stone like a hymn, not of sorrow, but of release. It was messy. It was chaotic, but it was beautiful. And then Sheriff Henry emerged from the shadows. He didn't run. He stepped into the open, hands up, shoulders slumped. His uniform was creased, badge still pinned above his heart like a lie that had finally run out of places to hide. His graying beard caught the sun for a moment, but his eyes were hollow, stripped of the smugness they once held. Jack walked toward him slowly, Rex beside him. An officer read Henry his rights. The cuffs clicked around his wrists. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mara stepped forward. Her voice was soft, but it carried like thunder. "You betrayed the badge. You hurt the innocent." Henry looked at her, and for the first time in years he had nothing to say. She turned to Jack. "They're free," she whispered, as if still needing to say it aloud to believe it. Jack didn't reply. He only looked around, at the open cages, the joyful chaos, the dogs leaping into the arms of rescuers. Behind them, Tim stood near a transport van, clutching one of the smaller pups to his chest. The little dog, pale tan with a dark nose and floppy ears, licked Tim's chin once, then curled into his jacket. Tim's lower lip trembled, but his eyes were shining with something fiercer than tears. He spotted someone in the crowd, a woman in her early 70s, tall and lean with silver-streaked hair pulled into a bun. She wore a thick brown coat and stood with her hands clasped, her mouth set in a small smile. Eleanor. She walked up behind Tim and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did good, kid," she murmured. "You stood tall." Tim blinked hard and looked down at the pup. He was cold. He just needed someone. Eleanor nodded. "Don't we all?" A soft breeze stirred through the trees above the quarry, scattering old pine needles over the gravel like confetti. Somewhere above, a hawk screeched. Not in warning, but in salute. Mara stepped closer to Jack and lowered her voice. "You held the line, even when no one listened." Jack glanced at Rex, who was now sniffing near a row of freed dogs, making sure they were safe. "I didn't do it alone," Jack said quietly. Mara followed his gaze. "No," she agreed. "You never were." The sun crested over the quarry rim, casting long golden beams across the stone and snow. It caught the eyes of every person, every dog, every wounded creature standing among the wreckage of what was once a cruel secret. And for the first time in years, Jack felt like the shadows were finally lifting. Spring arrived with a gentler breeze than the town of Cedar Hollow had felt in years. The snow that once blanketed the forest now gave way to tender grass and blooming wildflowers. At the edge of the ridge where pine trees bowed in reverence, the land had changed. Where an old cabin once stood alone in weariness, there now rose a place of purpose, Shepherd's Haven. The sanctuary stood modest but proud. Jack had worked tirelessly for weeks, with a slow, steady grace that came from years of soldiering and solitude. He had reinforced the cabin, added a wide-fenced courtyard with clean straw and shaded corners. A wooden sign hung above the gate, hand-painted by Tim in bold, childlike letters with playful paw prints around the edges. Shepherd's Haven, a place to heal. Tim, now with cheeks fuller and eyes clearer, had taken on the role of apprentice. He rose early, fed the dogs, swept the paths, and sketched new design ideas for their play area in a battered notebook he carried everywhere. When people from town visited, Tim would stand tall, hands behind his back, like a young ranger giving a tour. "This is Max's zone search and fine training. That's Luna's nook. She likes sun there." The dogs had their own routines, shaped not by orders, but by instinct and kindness. Rex, though now fully 10, moved with the gravity of a retired general. His sable coat glistened in the sun, his bent ear twitching at the laughter of children who came to read aloud beside him. They'd sit on soft mats beneath the makeshift roof Jack built a corner draped with vines and tiny wind chimes. Some kids brought books, others simply brought their troubles. Rex listened all the same. Bella, still favoring her left hind leg, had found a new role. With gentle temperament and eyes that held decades of sorrow and warmth, she was taken weekly to the Cedar Hollow nursing home. There, residents with slow steps and silent stories stroked her ears and whispered memories into her fur. One elderly woman, Sarah Franklin, tall and thin, with silver braids and trembling fingers, claimed Bella reminded her of her childhood dog named Molly. "She knew when I cried, just like Bella does now," she'd whisper, tears slipping unnoticed. Max became the teacher, his energy channeled into guiding younger rescues through basic scent work. With Tim's help, they built a simple obstacle course, tunnels made from crates, objects hidden under buckets, and flags tied to poles. Watching Max demonstrate then patiently correct the pups was like watching a wise uncle who never raised his voice but never missed a mistake. Duke remained the guardian. Stoic, broad-chested, his fur bristled at the slightest unfamiliar sound. Yet his loyalty found new direction. On field trip days, he stood beside the schoolchildren from Pine Ridge Elementary, guiding them through the grounds. Teachers joked that Duke understood the bus schedule better than they did. And Luna-sweet, trembling Luna had blossomed into a quiet wonder. Though she still startled at sudden noises, she no longer flinched at footsteps. Whenever someone approached and extended a hand, Luna would hesitate only a breath, then raise her paw and place it gently in theirs, as if to say, "I'll trust you now." One afternoon, a girl with autism named Ellie visited, quiet and unsure. Luna nestled beside her, their bodies touching lightly, heartbeat to heartbeat. Ellie smiled for the first time that week. The grand opening ceremony brought together townsfolk who once kept their distance. Sheriff Mara was there, off duty, her red curls falling free and her uniform replaced by jeans and a denim jacket. She had brought a basket of biscuits, both for people and dogs. Eleanor, hair in her usual bun and dress crisp with starch, had tears in her eyes as she handed out hand-sewn collars to each dog, each embroidered with their names and a small stitched cross. As sunlight danced across the courtyard, 2 new puppies stumbled into the spotlight. One had a bold white streak down its back and eyes that held stormy fire. The other was smaller, shyer, always following the first. "They need names," Mara had said. Tim, looking around at everyone, raised his voice just enough. "Hope and valor!" People clapped. Jack said nothing, only looked down at Rex sitting beside him. He placed his weathered hand on the dog's back, gave a small nod. "We did it," he murmured. "You and me, soldier. We've built home." That night, when everyone had gone and the sun had dipped behind the trees, the sanctuary stood still. Fireflies hovered. The wind carried the smell of pine and lavender. Inside the cabin, Jack lit a single lantern and sat by the hearth writing a letter. He wrote not to the mayor or the press, but to an old friend long gone. "If you can see this, Lucas, know that we didn't quit. Not when they mocked us, not when the cold came, not when the darkness tried to crawl back in. We turned battlefields into a sanctuary. We turned wounded creatures into healers. We turned a man into a home again." Rex rested at his feet, eyes half closed. Outside, the dogs lay curled in hay, paws twitching in dreams, and at the gate the sign swayed in the breeze. Shepherd's Haven, glowing under starlight. In a world where cruelty once reigned behind locked doors and broken fences, a miracle rose from the ruins. Not with thunder or trumpets, but through quiet acts of love, loyalty, and redemption. It wasn't just Jack or Rex who saved the dogs. It was the spirit that moved through them, the whisper of something higher, something holy. A wounded soldier and a scarred German shepherd, both once discarded, became instruments of healing for others. That is no coincidence. That is grace. Sometimes God sends his miracles not with wings, but with paws. Through the wag of a tail, the trust of a trembling dog, or the bravery of a boy with a paintbrush, he reminds us that no life is too broken to be rebuilt. That even in the coldest places, warmth can bloom again. That family can be made, not by blood, but by bond. So, if you've ever felt lost, cast aside, or like your story has ended, remember Jack and Rex. Remember that miracles often come after the storm, not before. Drop an amen in the comments if you believe every creature deserves a second chance. Share this story with someone who needs hope. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss another true story of courage, loyalty, and God's quiet miracles. May God bless you and your family always.